It was on your bicycle, on the chrome tank between your knees, in raised letters you could feel with your thumb when you stopped at the corner. It was on your BB gun, on the barrel, stamped in steel, the first thing you read every morning when you pulled it out of the closet. It was on your fishing rod, on your baseball glove, on your sleeping bag, on the knife in your pocket. One name. On everything you owned that mattered. J.C. Higgins. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The bicycle came first. It always came first. You were 7 or 8, maybe 9, and your father took you to Sears on a Saturday morning and walked you past the appliances and the tools and the clothing racks to the back of the store where the bikes hung from hooks on a pegboard wall like a fleet of chrome and steel dreams waiting to be claimed. And there it was, a J.C. Higgins. American steel, not the thin, hollow tubing they use now, but real steel. The kind that weighed something, the kind that meant something when you picked it up. Two-tone paint, red and cream, or blue and white, or black and chrome so bright you could see your face in the fender. A tank on the crossbar with the name stamped on both sides. Dual headlights that made it look like a Cadillac that had been shrunk to the size of a 10-year-old's ambition. Fenders that curved like the hood of a Buick. A coaster brake that stopped you with a sound like a short prayer. Chrome everywhere. On the handlebars, on the chain guard, on the rims, on the kickstand. It didn't look like a bicycle, it looked like a vehicle. It looked like it belonged on a highway, not a sidewalk. Your father put his hand on the seat and squeezed the tire and checked the chain tension and nodded, and that noddy meant more than anything he could have said, because that nod meant this one. He paid for it at the counter. You rode it through the parking lot before he could get the car started. And for the next 5 years, that bicycle was not a bicycle. It was a spacecraft, a racehorse, a getaway car. It was the machine that took you everywhere you needed to go and brought you back before the streetlights came on. And the name on the tank, J.C. Higgins, was the first brand you ever trusted before you even knew what a brand was. You rode it home. Wobbling at first, then steady, then fast. The chrome caught the sun and threw it back at the houses you passed like a signal fire. The name on the tank blurred as you picked up speed, but you knew it was there. J.C. Higgins. You didn't know who he was. You didn't care. You knew his name was on your bike, and your bike was the best thing you had ever owned, and that was enough. The BB gun came next. A year later, maybe 2, your father brought it home in a long box and set it on the kitchen table and looked at you the way a man looks at his son when he is about to hand him something that requires trust. Not the kind of trust where you promise to clean your room. The kind of trust where you promise not to point it at anyone ever, and you mean it and he believes you. And for the first time in your life, an adult is treating you like you are capable of being responsible for something dangerous. He opened the box. He showed you how to cock it, the lever action, the click that meant it was ready. He showed you how to load the BBS from the tube. He showed you how to hold it, stock against your shoulder, cheek against the wood, left hand under the barrel, right hand on the trigger guard. And then he said the thing that every father said, don't point it at anything you don't intend to shoot. And you nodded, and he believed you. The J.C. Higgins was on the barrel. You read it every time you raised the gun to your shoulder. You read it so many times, it became part of the ritual. Stock against your cheek, sight on the target, J.C. Higgins between your hands, breathe out, squeeze. The tin can jumped off the fence post. Your father was standing behind you. He didn't clap. He didn't cheer. He put his hand on your shoulder and squeezed once, and that squeeze was worth more than every trophy you would ever win in your life. Because that squeeze meant, you're ready. I trust you. You're not a little kid anymore. You shot that BB gun every day after school until the light went orange and your mother called you in for dinner. You got better. You moved from cans to smaller cans to acorns balanced on the top of the fence post to bottle caps hung from a string. You learned to lead a moving target by watching sparrows, not to hit them, just to track them, to understand how a thing in motion requires you to aim where it will be, not where it is. Nobody taught you that in a classroom. J.C. Higgins taught you that in the backyard, and your father's hand on your shoulder taught you the rest. The fishing rod came on a birthday or maybe from the Sears catalog, the big one, the fall edition, the one that weighed 3 pounds and had 1,000 pages and landed on your doorstep like a phone book full of everything you could want if you wanted enough of it. You lay on the floor with it, the same floor, the same position, the same elbows in the carpet concentration that every boy in America assumed when the Sears catalog arrived. The J.C. Higgins rods were in the sporting goods section between the reels and the tackle boxes, illustrated in full color with prices that your father could afford because Sears made everything affordable and J.C. Higgins made affordable feel like quality. Bamboo fly rods for trout, fiberglass spinning rods for bass. Your first rod was fiberglass, 6 feet long, light enough to cast one-handed, strong enough to land a fish that felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but turned out to be a 12-inch bluegill that your father said was the biggest he had seen all summer, and you believed him because you were 10, and fathers don't lie about fish, not to their sons, not on a Saturday morning at the lake with the fog still on the water and the bobber floating motionless and the world still quiet enough to hear a dragonfly land on the surface 10 feet away. That was the morning you learned patience, not because someone taught it to you, because the fish made you wait and the rod in your hands, the J.C. Higgins rod, was the thing you held onto while you learned. The baseball glove was different. The glove was not about freedom or trust or fishing. The glove was about belonging. Your glove had a player's name stamped in the pocket, Bob Feller or some other man you had never met, but whose signature meant that this glove was serious. This was not a toy. This was equipment. You oiled it with neat's foot oil. You put a ball in the pocket and wrapped it with a rubber band and slept with it under your mattress because someone told you that's how you break it in. And whether it worked or not didn't matter because the ritual made you feel like a ball player. And on the heel of the glove, below the lacing, in letters you could feel when you squeezed your fist, it said J.C. Higgins. The sleeping bag came before your first camping trip. Your mother rolled it tight and strapped it to the bottom of your pack and told you to keep it dry, and you promised and you didn't, and it smelled like wet canvas and campfire smoke for the rest of your childhood. J.C. Higgins on the tag. The knife came in a leather sheath on your belt. J.C. Higgins on the snap. The tent your father set up in the backyard so you could practice before the real trip. J.C. Higgins on the stakes. The canteen, the cook set, the compass, all of it. One name, one brand, one man, or so you thought, standing behind every piece of gear that made you feel like you could survive anything the woods threw at you, even if the woods were just the tree line behind the elementary school. Here is the thing nobody told you. The thing that, if you're hearing it for the first time right now, is going to make you set down whatever you're holding and stare at the wall for a second. J.C. Higgins was not a sportsman. He was not a hunter. He was not a fisherman. He was not an outdoorsman. He never climbed a mountain or paddled a canoe or cast a fly rod or fired a shotgun at a rising pheasant. J.C. Higgins, the name that was on your bicycle, your BB gun, your fishing rod, your baseball glove, your sleeping bag, your knife, your tent, your canteen, your compass, and every other piece of gear that defined your childhood belonged to a bookkeeper. His real name was John Higgins. He was born in Ireland, emigrated to Chicago as a teenager, and in 1898, at the age of 14, he got a job at Sears as a cash boy, a kid who ran money back and forth between the sales floor and the cash office. He was good with numbers. He was quiet. He showed up every day. He rose through the ranks: bookkeeper, head bookkeeper, comptroller, vice president. He helped create the company's employee profit-sharing plan. He retired in 1930 after 32 years of service. He died in 1950. He did not have a middle name. The C was invented by a Sears executive who thought J.C. Higgins looked better on a label than J. Higgins. The initial stood for nothing. The man stood for nothing. Nothing outdoors, nothing athletic, nothing rugged. He was a man who counted other people's money in a building in Chicago, and Sears put his name on 54 years of sporting goods because they liked the way it sounded. And here is the part that should make you angry or laugh or both. Every time you looked at that name on your bicycle and felt proud, every time you trusted that name on your BB gun because you believed it was built by a man who understood what a boy needed, every time you handed your J.C. Higgins fishing rod to your own son and said, "This is a good rod, this name means something," you were trusting a ghost, a phantom, a name without a face, without a story, without a single day spent in the woods or on the water or anywhere that was not an office on the 4th floor of the Sears headquarters in Chicago. But here is the other part, the part that matters more. The gear was good. The bicycle was American steel and it lasted 20 years. The BB gun was accurate and it never jammed. The fishing rod bent without breaking and the reel turned without sticking, and the sleeping bag kept you warm on nights when the temperature dropped below what your mother would have allowed if she had known. The baseball glove broke in perfectly and the pocket held the ball and the lacing never came loose. John Higgins may not have known a trout from a trombone, but the products that carried his name were built by people who did. Marlin made the rifles, High Standard made the shotguns, Murray made the bicycles, Horrocks Ibbotson made the fly rods. These were real companies with real craftsmen who made real things that worked, and Sears sold them under a name that belonged to a man who had never used any of them. And it worked. It worked for 54 years. 7 million Sears catalogs per issue, each one carrying the J.C. Higgins name into homes from Maine to California, from Montana to Mississippi. Millions of boys grew up believing that J.C. Higgins was a real outdoorsman, and millions of those boys grew up to be men who kept their J.C. Higgins shotguns in the closet and their J.C. Higgins bicycles in the garage, and their J.C. Higgins fishing rods in the basement. And when their sons were old enough, when the son looked at the father the way the father had once looked at his own father, they took the shotgun out of the closet, oiled the action, checked the barrel, and handed it over. Same gun, same name, different boy, and the boy held it with the same care and the same pride and read the same words on the barrel, J.C. Higgins, and felt the same thing his father had felt and his grandfather before that. Trust, quality, a name that meant something, even if nobody knew what. 3 generations, 1 shotgun, 1 name, a bookkeeper from Ireland who died before most of these boys were born, whose ghost lived on in the steel and wood and chrome of things that were too well made to throw away and too meaningful to sell. Because Sears killed J.C. Higgins. In 1961, they signed a deal with Ted Williams, the greatest hitter in baseball history, a man who batted .406 in 1941, a man who served as a fighter pilot in 2 wars, a real sportsman, a real name, a real face that people recognized on the street. Ted Williams was everything J.C. Higgins was not: alive, famous, and genuinely capable of catching a fish. Sears replaced J.C. Higgins on every label, every package, every page of the catalog. The fictional outdoorsman was erased and replaced by a living legend. 54 years of trust, wiped out in a single business decision by men in a boardroom who decided that a real name was worth more than a ghost. And just like that, after 54 years, after millions of bicycles and shotguns and fishing rods and baseball gloves and sleeping bags and tents and knives and canteens, J.C. Higgins was gone. No farewell, no announcement, no explanation, no thank you. The name that had been on everything a boy owned was suddenly on nothing. And nobody at Sears thought to ask the boys if they cared. They cared. They just didn't know it yet. They wouldn't know it until 30, 40, 50 years later when they opened a closet or a garage or a basement and found something with that name on it and felt a tightness in their chest that they couldn't explain. And then Sears killed Ted Williams too. By the late 70s, the Ted Williams brand was phased out. By 1980, Sears stopped selling firearms entirely. The sporting goods section shrank, the catalog got thinner, the stores got emptier, and the company that had been the largest retailer in America for most of the 20th century, the company that had put a bookkeeper's name on $1 billion worth of outdoor gear and convinced an entire nation that J.C. Higgins was a man worth trusting, that company died too. 2 stores left, 2 out of thousands. 3 deaths. The imaginary man, the real man, and the company that created them both. But the things survive. That is the part that John Higgins, the quiet bookkeeper from Ireland who counted other people's money for 32 years, would never have believed. The shotgun that your grandfather bought from the Sears catalog in 1952 is still in your closet. The bicycle that your father rode to school in 1955 is still in your garage. The fishing rod that you carried to the lake every Saturday morning in 1960 is still in your basement, and the reel still turns and the line is still on it. And if you picked it up right now and walked to the nearest body of water and cast it, it would work. Because it was built to work, and it was built to last. And the name on it, the name that belonged to a man who never fished a day in his life, that name lasted too. J.C. Higgins, a bookkeeper from Dublin, a name invented by a company that no longer exists, stamped on the things that taught you to ride and shoot and fish and camp and play and grow up. You trusted that name your whole childhood. And the strange thing, the beautiful, ridiculous, perfectly American thing is that the name deserved your trust, not because of the man behind it, because of the things that carried it, the steel, the chrome, the wood, the leather, the craftsmanship of people whose names you never knew, building things for a boy they never met, under a name that belonged to a man who never left his desk. That is the most American story ever told. And now you know who J.C. Higgins really was. And now you know that it doesn't matter, because the bike still rides, the gun still shoots, the rod still casts. And somewhere in your house right now, there is something with that name on it, something your grandfather bought, or your father kept, or you found at a swap meet and couldn't leave behind, and it still works. 70 years later, it still works. He was a bookkeeper, and his name is on the best things you ever owned.